Thanks very much, Abby. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening if you're in Asia. So my name is Ilke, and I'm here today to talk about mobile research. Now, as we know, mobile research isn't the latest invention, right? It's has been around for quite a few years already, and many companies are dabbling with this technique. But I think it's safe to claim that we are still trying to figure out how and when exactly to apply mobile research. And that is something that I want to address in today's webinar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you an example of how we used mobile research with a notoriously difficult target group, the physicians, and how it led to new and very powerful insights for our client. Now, for those of you who work in healthcare market research, you know that doing market research with physicians can be difficult, right? We cannot get the same sample sizes as our colleagues in the consumer world, and also physicians tend to be a little bit rigid, if you will, in their willingness to work with new methodologies such as mobile research. But nonetheless, we managed to overcome these hurdles, which is something that I want to talk about today. So I'm going to present outcomes from an actual study, and the study was about understanding prescribing decisions. And as we know, prescribing decisions, they happen during patient consultations. I'm first going to use System 1 and System 2 theory in order to explain why in certain situations doing your research in the moment can be so important. Now, I'm sure that some of you are aware of System 1 and System 2 already, and some of you may not. So I want to introduce it anyway to make sure that we're all on the same page. Then I will sort of build a bridge towards healthcare. So why does System 1 and System 2 matter to healthcare, and how can we use it to, why is it important to get a better understanding of prescribing decisions? And lastly, I want to show you some of the outcomes from this research. And also, I want to show you what our client did with these insights. So I want to go a little bit beyond just describing the technique, but also show you some of the deeper insights that we got from doing mobile research. Now, System 1 and System 2 has been made famous by someone called Daniel Kahneman. I'm sure some of you have heard of him already. Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics. And in 2011, he published a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you don't have a copy of that book, I can highly recommend it. It's very insightful. It's Thinking Fast and Slow. And this book basically summarizes 4 decades of his work. And the book is based on this dual mode of decision making, System 1 and System 2. Now, System 1 and System 2 are 2 forms of thinking. There are 2 fundamentally different forms of decision making, or 2 fundamentally different forms of how your brain works. System 1 is fast. System 1 is also subconscious. If I take the example of a very easy calculation, such as 2 plus 2, we all know that the answer is 4, so we don't need to think about this long at all. We just instantly know that the answer is 4. It's very fast, and we intuitively know that the answer is 4. So another way of describing a System 1 activity would be your intuition. Now, on the other hand, a System 2 activity is slow. So I just talked about the example of a simple equation. If you take a very difficult equation, like 313 times 674, for example, unless you're a math genius, you probably need paper and pencil to work out what the answer is. And it's going to cause you cognitive strain. It's going to cause you effort. So System 2 is conscious. If you do a difficult calculation, for example, you need to go about it very methodically. So it's a conscious activity. It's slow. It takes cognitive effort. And another way of describing your System 2 is rational thought. Now, in a minute, I'm going to show you some further examples of System 1 and System 2 activities. But first of all, I want to make one point about System 1 before we move on. This is quite important for the story, and I will get back to this later on in the presentation as well. So please keep this in the back of your mind. So as I just explained, System 1 is subconscious, but there is a conscious component to a System 1, and that's an emotion. So the conscious output of a System 1 activity is an emotion. For example, if you go look at art, you go to the Tate Britain, for example, and you look at some nice old historic paintings. Looking at paintings is mostly a System 1 activity, and it doesn't cause any effort. It doesn't cause cognitive strain. And a nice painting can elicit a certain emotion, and that's basically the conscious output of that particular System 1 activity. If you look at a beautiful painting, it elicits a certain emotion. It can make you feel good. It can perhaps make you feel sad, or it can make you feel anxious. And this all gets started by your System 1 being engaged. So the conscious output of a System 1 activity is an emotion. Keep this in the back of your mind. I will get back to this later on in this presentation. So we talked about System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, and it's conscious, and it's subconscious, and it doesn't take any effort. It doesn't cause cognitive strain. For example, an easy equation such as 2 + 2. However, a difficult equation is a good example of a System 2 activity. It's a conscious activity. It causes effort. It's slower, and we tend to lose concentration if we do too many difficult calculations, for example. Another example of a System 1 activity is detecting that one object is more distant than another. We just know it. We don't need to think about it. We just know that one object is further away. That's an example of a System 1 activity, and it doesn't cause any effort. It doesn't cause any cognitive strain. Now, filling out a cumbersome text form, very much a System 2 activity, right? No one likes it. If we do it for too long, we tend to lose concentration, maybe start to make mistakes. It's a System 2 activity. Completing a simple phrase, bread and butter. We all know the answer. We don't need to think about it. We happen intuitively. We know how to finish this particular phrase. Completing a complex market research survey, on the other hand, is a System 2 activity. So we often ask our respondents to do System 2 activities, and that's also the reason why our surveys cannot be 2 hours in length, because then respondents start to lose concentration and they start to make mistakes. It's a System 2 activity. Read words on large billboards. We just know what the word means. It's a System 1 activity. Counting the letter A in a piece of text. We give you a piece of text and I ask you to count the letter A. You need to slow down. You need to read the words and you need to concentrate, and it causes a lot more effort. That's a System 2 activity. Okay, and this is important for this story. An activity which can seem complex to most people can still be a System 1 activity to the expert. For example, Garry Kasparov is considered to be one of the world's best chess players. He can basically, for the most part, use his intuition to make a chess move. Intuitively, he knows what not to do and what chess moves could be beneficial. I, on the other hand, can't do that. So playing chess for me is very much a System 2 activity. It causes a lot of effort and I really need to concentrate. And this is really important because it means that if you become the expert, an activity can move from the realm of the System 2 into the realm of the System 1. And this builds a nice bridge to our story in healthcare, because as I explained to you earlier, the business case that I want to present to you was about understanding prescribing decisions. So what kind of decisions are prescribing decisions? We believe that for the experienced doctor, a prescribing decision is for the most part a System 1 activity. Okay. So if you take the medical student, for example, for a medical student, running a patient consultation and making a prescribing decision is a very strenuous activity. It causes a lot of effort, right? The medical student needs to take a lot of variables into account, like test outcomes, patient characteristics, and then he or she needs to speak with the patient and consider their answers and then take all of that and make a prescribing decision during the patient consultation. So it's a very strenuous activity. And if you ask the medical student to do several patient consultations on a day, I'm sure he's going to be very tired towards the end. Now, as the medical student becomes more experienced, he or she is going to see many patients. Then the medical student becomes a doctor, and he or she may see up to 20 patients on a day. Do that for several years, and the activity of running a patient consultation is going to be very different. The doctor is going to basically use his intuition. He can use his intuition in order to run the patient consultation and reach to a prescribing decision. Right? So just like the chess master can use his intuition to make a chess move, an experienced doctor can use his intuition to prescribe drugs. So we believe that a prescribing decision is for a large part a system 1 activity. Now, what does this mean for research? As I explained to you earlier on that slide with the iceberg, a conscious output of a system 1 activity is an emotion. So that means that if the doctor uses his or her system 1 to reach a prescribing decision, it will mean that this prescribing decision would be made in the context of a particular emotion which is elicited by their system 1. Now, if you conduct a measurement, so if you want to understand more about prescribing decisions and you conduct a measurement, i.e. the market research, far away from the actual occurrence, so the patient consultation, let's say there's a week in between, you can be pretty sure that the doctor will not experience this particular emotion anymore, which was elicited by using their system 1 during the patient consultation. All right, so the emotions, they wear off. Also, the recall fades. It's going to be quite difficult to remember all the details a week after the actual patient consultation. And you will see that the answer that they give, if you ask them why they prescribe this particular drug to this particular patient, you will see that the answer that they give will be solely based on hard clinical facts, like test outcomes and patient characteristics. Now, if you conduct a measurement, the market research, closer to the actual occurrence, the patient consultation, you will see, and we have seen, that the answer tends to be based on more softer factors. Right? We know that only hard clinical facts, that's not the full truth. It's not only about test outcomes. It's not only about patient characteristics. And if you conduct a measurement closer to the occurrence, you've seen that the answer will be based on more softer factors like patient wishes and social support, for example. Also, if the measurement takes place close to the occurrence, it's going to be a lot easier to recall why exactly they prescribed this particular drug. They can recall the details. And you will see, and we have seen, that the answer tends to be based on a combination of soft and hard factors. Now, a way of understanding prescribing decisions is what we call here the postdoc method. So you ask a doctor to fill in a patient record. So after they see a patient or they go through their database and they fill in a patient record, they note down what kind of drug the patient got, some test outcomes, some patient characteristics. And then you ask the doctor to take the patient record to a research facility. In the research facility, we have a moderator asking the doctor questions about this particular patient. Now you can probably see the problem here, because when you speak to them at the research facility, it will probably be at least a week after they've seen this particular patient. So what happens is that the doctor will probably take out their patient record, they will read through the patient record, and the answer will probably be based on things that are in the patient records, which are usually hard clinical facts like test outcomes. Now, a solution to this problem would be what we call here the ad hoc method, is that you do your research in the moment. So instead of asking them to take a patient record to a research facility, you ask them to download a survey app and to answer questions directly after they see a patient. So literally, when the patient walks out the door, the doctor would pull out their smartphone and open the survey app and start answering questions. So here, it's much more likely that you capture the doctor while they are still experiencing this particular emotion brought up by their system 1. and it's going to be a lot easier for the doctor to recall the details, the exact details of why they prescribed this particular drug to this particular patient. Okay, so I told you that I would go through a business case. So let me explain here what the business problem was that the client was facing. This was in oncology, by the way, late stage oncology. So the problem was that the brands on the market were perceived by the physicians as being very similar. So they did our conventional qual, they did our conventional quant. During the conventional qual, they, for example, asked, could you please describe a typical patient for brand A? Could you please describe a typical patient for brand B? And what do you know? Those patients are almost exactly the same. So the doctors really had trouble describing what particular patient populations should be served by these brands. Nonetheless, they were still making prescribing decisions. So if conventional research cannot answer why they would choose brand A over B, it becomes very unclear what is really driving the prescribing. And this client wanted to understand what drives prescribing, because only then can you truly focus your marketing strategy. Right, so the brands were perceived as similar. It was unclear what was driving prescribing, and the client needed to understand these drivers in order to focus their marketing strategy. Now this is when we started talking with this client. So they did our conventional research. It wasn't enough. So we suggested mobile research. Now let me explain you a little bit about the setup of a mobile research study. The app that you're going to use, the server app, needs to be really simple. It needs to be really short. Doctors are busy people. They see many patients on a day. Maybe they see up to 20 patients on a day. So they need to be able to do the market research in between patient consultations. Patient walks out, the other is waiting, knocking on the door. They need to be able to do the research in between the patient consultations. So we had, first of all, in the app, we had 3 minutes of closed questions. I would actually want to say up to 3 minutes, because they were very short and easy, very quick to complete by the respondent. And these closed questions were mainly like these clinical factors, like test outcomes and patient characteristics, and for instance, what kind of drug they got, and kind of drugs they got in the past. And then we asked them to record a 2-minute voice memo using their smartphone. In the voice memo, we asked them to describe what kind of drug they described, why they prescribed this particular drug, why did they not prescribe any of the other drugs on the market, and what happened during the patient consultation which led them to prescribing this particular drug. And the respondents were briefed on this thoroughly ahead of initiation of the fieldwork phase. So very short and sweet. These are just a few screenshots to show you that the questions need to be really easy. So male, female, tick or cross. You can use some images, but don't go overboard, and very simple numeric questions, for example. So they need to be really easy. And what I want to do now is to show an example of some of the output that we got from the voice memo. So remember that it's a 2-minute voice memo, or some doctors actually, they took 5 minutes even. It's very rich data what we got. What kind of drug did they get? Why did they prescribe this particular drug? Why did they not prescribe any of the other drugs in the market? And what happened during the patient consultation that led them to prescribing this drug? All right, there we go. I needed to edit down this voice memo a little bit because there were some brand mentions, needs to stay confidential, and there was some medical jargon as well. It's not important for now, but I think it will give you a nice example of the output that we got from this research.
I just saw a 64-year-old male who's been a patient in our practice for several years, now found to have progressive cancer. I discussed with him multiple treatment options. Patient preferred oral regimen. He was not interested in coming in for infusions for chemotherapy treatments and was very concerned about the potential side effects. I did discuss the patient, the prognosis, and that the treatment is for palliation alone. We also discussed issues with cost and that this is a relatively expensive oral medication. And if there's co-payment required, we have a co-payment assistance program in our office that can help him with that. Patient understood this. He has a good social support, has good family support, is able to be brought to the office regularly. A patient understood all the recommendations and agreed with our treatment plan. Thank you.
Okay, so two things stand out from this voice memo. First of all, you can really hear how the treatment decision was really sort of a two-way street between the physician and the patient. So it wasn't just the physician saying, "Oh, you should get this drug," and that's the end of it. It was really a discussion. So the physician suggested the drug, the patient declined the drug, the physician suggested something else, the patient agreed to that particular drug. Very much a two-way street. The second thing that stands out from this voice memo is the extent to which the physician stresses the social support of the patient. So clearly that was very important. And this is just one example of a voice memo. We actually captured many of such voice memos where the physicians address the social support of the patient. A little bit about the research. We conducted the research in the US and in Europe. We had 50 physicians in the US, 65 physicians in Europe. And we gathered over 500 cases. Right? You can see, so each of these cases had these answers to the closed questions and the voice memo. So you can see that it creates a very rich and a massive data set to work with. Because basically, by using the closed questions, you can make numerous very valuable breakdowns and look at certain patient segments and see if the softer reasons differ between patient segments, for example. Now, as promised, I will explain to you what came out of the research. The main thing that was new to us and new to the client was the sheer extent to which the patient was being involved in the treatment decision. And remember, this was oncology, late-stage oncology. So we all know that the patient can influence a treatment decision, okay? We knew that, the client knew that, but the sheer extent to which this was happening was new. It was new information. As I shown you on the previous slide, we gathered over 500 cases, and in over 60% of those cases, we could detect at least some influence of the patient on the treatment decision. And this was much higher than we expected. There are three ways that the patient could influence the treatment decision. They could decline the drug. This happened quite a lot. So the physician would suggest something, and then that's also what we heard in the voice memo just now. So the physician would suggest something, and the patient would decline the drug, and then the physician would suggest something else. Another way, also quite prevalent, is that the patient would proactively suggest a treatment. So the patient would read about treatments at home, online, and then the patient would take this information to the treatment decision. And in most of those cases, the doctor would actually go with that particular suggestion, because the brands are perceived to be quite similar. A third way, and this is really a two-way street, is that the physician would present several options and then ask the patient to make a choice. We also saw this quite a lot. So the physician would say, this is brand A, here are the pros and cons. This is brand B, here are the pros and cons. This is brand C, here are the pros and cons. Now you make a choice. Now that's truly a two-way street, right? That's truly patient influence. So now that we learned that the patient is so influential in the treatment decision, some big actions were taken by our client. Now, as I mentioned, that this research was conducted in Europe and in the US. And in the US, it's possible to do direct-to-consumer advertising. If you go to the US and you switch on the television, you see a lot of advertisements for pharmaceuticals. In fact, New Zealand is the only other country where this is allowed. It's not allowed in Europe. But because the patient was so influential in the treatment decision, they decided to increase their DTC, their direct-to-consumer advertising in the US. The second big action taken by our client is they decided to tweak the messaging to support the physician-patient dialogue. So the messages that they had were very much geared towards the doctor. However, if you can design messages that are appealing to both the doctor and the physician, then the doctor may use your messages to explain the pros and cons of your drug. If you can make that happen, so if you can make the doctor use your messages to explain the pros and cons of your drug, you're directly influencing the moment that matters the most, which is during the patient consultation when the prescribing decision is being made. Right? So these are very big actions taken by our client as a result of this research to increase DTC in the US and to tweak the messaging to support a physician-patient dialogue. All right, this brings me to the end of this presentation. I think the main conclusion is that in certain cases you can get a new and powerful outcomes by using mobile research. In fact, you can get new and powerful outcomes that you couldn't get with conventional qual and conventional quant. And a situation as, for example, the brands being perceived as very similar really is a good situation to use mobile research to get the new insights. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now open the floor to any questions.
Great, thank you, Elke. Yeah, like I mentioned, if you want to still ask a question, you can put it in below, and we'll be happy to answer it. I've got one here already. How can you be sure the respondents really submitted their cases in the moment, quote unquote?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question. So when a respondent submits a case, you can see the time at which the case was submitted, right? So if you see 5 cases, we ask each doctor to submit 5 cases, by the way, for this particular research. When you see 5 cases being submitted at exactly the same time, it gets a little bit suspicious, right? So it's really important for the recruitment company and also for the market research company to really keep a close eye on the data which comes in. Now that said, the nice thing about the survey app is that you don't have to have a Wi-Fi connection to submit a case. But if you submit a case, it will basically be put on hold until you have a Wi-Fi connection. So it could mean that maybe you see 2 patients during the day, you don't have a Wi-Fi connection, you do the market research, the 2 cases get saved, and then maybe in the evening when you have a Wi-Fi connection again, then the cases will be submitted. And then you see 2 cases being submitted at exactly the same time. However, in such a situation, we would still recommend that you speak to the recruitment, to the fieldwork company, and ask them to reach out to the doctor to ask them, hey, was this indeed the case, or perhaps did the doctor not fully understand what was expected from them? As I mentioned also during the presentation, it's really important to do a very sort of in-depth briefing to really make sure to mention several times that you really want them to do the research in the moment. If they still don't do it, and it happened once or twice during this research, then you really need to go back to the doctor and say, I'm very sorry, but you know, we cannot reimburse you for these cases for this particular reason. So to make a long answer short, how can you be 100% sure? I think 100% sure you cannot be, but it's really important to monitor the data that comes in very closely and reach out to the doctor if something looks suspicious.